One right after another. It's the last day of the season. You got a rough act to follow. Bobby D was on before
Bobby
you.
Bobby D is always tough to follow. He's outstanding. He's the best.
I'm not going to ask you about Dollar Dog Night next year, though.
No, don't ask me about that. Let's talk about something else.
He covered our tracks in
he
that
did,
regard.
All right.
Mark Shapiro, the president of the Cleveland Indians, joining us here on the last day of the season. I got a caller the other day. I want to clear this up first of all. That thinks you're still calling the shots. I said that I don't think so. Mark's in an administrative capacity now with his title of president.
I would call it a leadership capacity more than an administrative capacity.
He's overseeing all the business aspects of the organization. Now, that doesn't mean to say that you are not consulted by Chris. You will give your advice. And I ended it, Mark, by saying I can't imagine Chris making a major deal or acquisition without going through you and Paul.
Right. So I guess, to give some clarification, so Chris technically reports to me. The business side and the baseball side both report to me, and I report to ownership. But I would say this to you, that I have got, unlike some other people that maybe GMs report to, I've got too much respect for what it takes to do that job, to intercede in a daily basis on decisions. I expect that we talk through decisions. There are times and junctures that we interact much more frequently, like when you're talking about a managerial decision. Prior to reaching a point of recommendation to ownership, he and I talked extensively about that. We will about the hiring process as well. But I respect Chris, one, and I respect the job, two, enough to know that with me running other parts of the organization as well and getting in and out of baseball, that I'm not best fit to just drive those decisions. I rely on him, the rest of our baseball operations staff, Mike Chernoff, Ross Atkins, the manager, Brad Grant, John Mirabelli, those people, Steve Lubratich, to help drive those decisions. But I'm involved in that process, and certainly I feel accountable for those things as well. And still feel very engaged in the baseball operation. I'm not out of the baseball operation.
Nobody was surprised at the announcement about Manny. I think we were all sad, and we genuinely liked Manny. I got along with him super, and I respect him as a baseball man. But you only answer to Paul and Larry. Chris answers to you. Do you realize how many calls I get that say there should be a total cleaning of house?
Oh, yeah. I realize that, and I would say this: when you fire a manager, a manager tends to be a lightning rod or a focal point for a lot of things. When you do well, managers sometimes get disproportionate amount of credit for what's going on, and when you struggle, they get a disproportionate amount of the blame. So managers get fired for drafts 8 to 10 years ago, for free agent signs recently. They get fired because players don't commit the way they should commit, which they actually should have some accountability for. They get fired for a variety of reasons, bad luck and injuries sometimes too. But when you're in our jobs and you look at what the levers are that you can pull that might have a broader impact, that might allow you to exceed objective expectations, to exceed maybe what your club should on paper exceed, a manager is one of those spots that does potentially have that impact. And if you're confident that a change could potentially result in an uplift, then you go with that decision. You don't do it lightly, particularly in the case of a guy you respect and like and admire as much as we do Manny, and that won't change. But you go into it thinking, hey, Sandy Alomar Jr., Terry Francona, these two options are also pretty exciting. They're pretty exciting options, and these two guys could potentially, result in an uplift of our team and a step forward for us.
Only, Paul, as I say, answer pertaining to your job, which again now is different as the president as opposed to when you were the general manager. But certainly in Chris's position, let me preface this by saying this, Mark. I preached last season before the season was over that the upcoming last off-season, was going to be the most important off-season for the Indians in many years, because I looked ahead at what was going to be available in free agency, etc. And obviously we came up with Aaron Cunningham, Casey Kochman, Derek Lowe, and later Johnny Damon. The fans chime in on that and say, well, Antonetti should have been fired as well as Manny Acta. Your response?
My response is, I look at the process involved, the resources we had, the parameters that guide our decisions, and I don't think any of us, not Chris, and he'll tell you if he's on later today, not me, feel like those were great decisions. But when looking at the realm of alternatives and options, we're not looking at the full plate, the full menu. And often when you sit back and in a position where you're not really accountable for those decisions and you're not really privy to all the information or the parameters that we have to make those decisions, it's easy to second guess. It's easy to be a revisionist historian. It's much harder to be there and try to make those decisions and craft a ball club, knowing that there are some significant challenges in place. I think the bigger the bigger realities of our challenge at this moment have to do with drafts 6, 7, 8, 9 years ago than they do with trying to choose from free agents in really the bargain basement selection of free agency. If you study the history of free agency and look at the galaxy of players that get signed largely to one-year deals and in the 4 to 7 million range, it is a real challenge, and you have to really hit the pot of gold to find the players who impact in those areas. The impact players are the players signed, usually to 4, 5, and 6-year deals in the 10 to $20 million range, and we're not often dealing with those players. Our success is predicated upon drafting, developing, players that can be our core players. And I feel in the last 3 years, the adjustments made in the draft have resulted in significant improvement.
Since you put Grant in.
Kipnis, Pestano, Chisenhall, numerous guys that are up here already contributing in a meaningful way. And I think we've already been good at trades. If you look at us and compare to all clubs, we needed to get better in the draft. I think we've made adjustments to how we draft. John Mirabelli, by the way, was still involved in all of
Right.
that. But we, as an organization, organized our draft differently and created our pref list differently.
That was under your umbrella. That's why some of the fans think you should go too, because that drafting throughout all those years when you were GM,
Right.
you only produced Jeremy Sowers.
Right. Well, you look at this one, when you make trades of major league players towards the end of their career, you lessen the chances of impact in the draft because you're saying instead of letting players go and getting additional draft picks, so you look at Brantley and Laporta. One of the two has been an impact so far, the other one hasn't. But you look at the players who were drafted in the slots. If we had let CeCe Sabathia go to free agency, and if I mentioned their names to you, you'd have no idea who they were. You would have promised me, have no idea, and the fans wouldn't either. So you also have to look at when you're making decisions on trading players, you're saying instead of getting additional draft picks, we're getting these players back. And those players, whether it's a Scott Barnes, whether it's a Carlos Santana, whether it's a Michael Brantley, they've also had an impact on our team. And we've largely, by any scale, if you evaluate on a universal scale, been successful in trades. You're never successful in 100% of them.
You did a good job on trades. I always say
So,
that. The drafting stunk. But
there are very few teams that are successful in every single facet, international drafting and developing
Let
players.
me ask you this. Is there an alternative to this strategy? Because the strategy has only produced one playoff team in all these years.
Yeah, two very successful teams in 05 and 07, two 500 teams around it.
But 05 didn't make it, Mark.
It doesn't matter. It's 93 wins. I mean, that puts you, not.
Doesn't matter not making the playoffs?
No, I mean, that's the goal, to make the playoffs. But if you win 93 wins every year, you're going to get in the playoffs quite a bit. So you've got to control what you can control, not what the teams around you, do that season. And, those are the kind of teams we need to build. And those are the types of runs, that from 05 to 07, 08 that we need to continue to get back to doing again. We've, tried to avoid talking about it, but some measure of cycling is probably inevitable in the situation we're in. We need to get through the downturns as quickly as humanly possible and stay in the upturns as long as possible. And we need to contend. We need to get into the playoffs. That's what we're driven to do here.
I know you've looked at the free agent market next year. It's very, very weak. It's an old folks' home. The fans are sick of the David DeLucci's, Jason Michaels, Aaron Cunninghams of the world filling a void like we have tried in left field. Is there going to be some money because of Hafner, Sizemore, Derek Lowe's contracts to spend?
Well, one of the misconceptions is that those guys leave and you just have that money. You've got increases in contracts to a large number of our players, whether it's Justin Masterson, Struble Cabrera, Shin-Soo Choo. You have built-in increases on a large number of players on our team that will take up a lot of that void leaving. That being said, Yes, we will have some money if the players of impact are out there and Chris and his staff recommend a sign that he and they think will make an impact to us. We'll have some resources. Again, what I'd encourage you to think about is, where is that money best spent? What types of players are able to sign? Like you said, there are probably 3 players of major impact in all of free agency this year. Those guys are going to be very tough, if not impossible, for us to compete on. When you start to get into the rest of the guys and you look at the history of those guys signed, there's a high probability of failure, even though you're thirsting an offseason on those guys.
Very true, but
So
that brings us to trades.
that brings you to trades, right?
The Indians cannot miss on a trade.
There's nobody that doesn't miss on trade.
Laporta was the main guy in
That
the
trade was still a good
deal.
trade. No, I mean, Brantley was still
Thank
a
God the
productive player.
Brewers made the playoffs, though, or we wouldn't have gotten. That was a
It
contingency.
doesn't matter. That's what happened, and we got a player we liked, a player we sought aggressively to get in the trade, and that's still a successful trade for us. If you look at the 2 players that, if we had gone draft picks for CC, or the other deals that we had a chance to make, that's still a trade of impact. When I hear people like you talk about Cliff Lee trade being a bad trade, look at the other times Cliff Lee was traded for.
That. I never said that.
Oh, I hear a lot of people calling
I never said that.
Okay.
I beg your pardon, Mr. Shapiro. I never said the Cliff Lee trade. Here's what I said to reiterate and clear so you may have heard some hearsay. They know, but now you need to know. I said that Cliff Lee was never going to stay with the Cleveland Indians. I said C.C. Sabathia was never going to stay with the Cleveland Indians. There was no way, no matter how much money.
The Phillies.
No matter how much money you offered him, neither one of them were going to test
so what
the
about
waters.
The trade?
And
That's the obvious.
The Victor Martinez deal, he would have stayed, but I never held you accountable for that because we made the deal
that was a
with
good trade.
Casey Blake for Santana, and the days of catching for Victor were far and few between.
Right.
As far as what
we got for Victor was good.
What we got, as far as the trading of those 2 guys with Lee and Sabathia, now I say with the Sabathia deal, it's thank God all the time I say that the Brewers made the playoffs because we got Brantley. It remains to be seen yet on the Philadelphia deal because of Carrasco, I think, now.
Either way,
but I never said I didn't like it.
Either way, if you look at
I knew it had to be done.
Either way, if you look at the galaxy of players that we got back, and you look at what Cliff was traded for other times, again, when you evaluate trades, evaluate them on the spectrum of all 30 teams in the trades they make. Nobody hits all the time. There's some risk to making trades. The only teams that are successful in making trades all the time are the teams that don't make deals. If you're going to make deals, you're going to make some bad deals. You want to evaluate the process that goes into the deals.
You can accord with me there. I've always complimented you on your trades. It's your drafting I think you stung.
Well, we did. I mean, I think in the last 3 years I've been happy with the drafts, but we picked late. We did not pick in the top, other than Jeremy Sowers, we didn't pick in the top, anywhere in the top 10 or top 6. That was as high as we ever picked, 6th. And we didn't hit when we needed to hit in other draft picks as well.
Let me ask you about Francona and Sandy. It's down to those 2?
I think we feel so strongly about those 2 that we're proceeding with those 2 with a secondary list that we don't think we're ever going to have to go to. We know those guys.
Not Albert Bell. Don't tell me Albert Bell. Come on.
we know those guys.
Although I think he'd yell at an umpire.
Yeah, we know those 2 guys. We think they're both. They both have bring a lot to the table. We both think they both would help us achieve what we want to achieve here, and we're excited. I guess we're excited about those 2 guys.
Is money a factor with Francona? He was making $4 million in his last year with Boston.
Money won't be a factor in our decision.
Sandy, well, if Francona demands to pick his own coaching staff, would you go with that?
I think the coaching staff. I think anybody that would demand to pick his own coaching staff is probably not a guy that we want to work with. I think we want to work with guys that want to collaborate. I think we wouldn't still be talking to him if he came in and demanded that he wanted to pick his own coaching staff.
I see.
The right attitude is that you collaborate. You build on the collective database of all the guys the manager's dealt with in his career and all the guys I've been in the game 20 years. I've got a lot of guys. Tito has a lot of guys. Chris has a lot of guys. Sandy has a lot of guys. You collectively sit down, talk, and you come up with the best coaching staff
Mark,
possible.
why do you think he'd want this challenge?
You have to ask him that. I mean, he's kind of been out there already saying that. I think when we've talked to him, I've challenged him. Chris has challenged him. Is this something you'd really want to do? Think forward to potentially guys being traded. Think forward to potentially us not being where we want to be next year. Would you still be happy to be here? And he said, hey, I embrace the challenge. You know, I want to work with Chris. I want to work with you. That means a lot to me to work with guys I respect and trust. And I want to get back to doing what I love doing, which is building and creating something special.
Two more questions. I'll let you.
But I'd let you ask. You know, if there's a chance to talk to him, I'd let you or either refer to his comments. He's been on ESPN a few times talking about it.
Right. Sandy, is there any scenario where if Francona got the job, Sandy would stay?
That's not something I think, you know, right now Sandy's focus should be on and is on getting the job and interviewing and doing a good job.
Right.
If there's a point where, you know, reach a point where, you know, Tito does get the job and Sandy doesn't, we want Sandy to be here no matter what. But right now, you know, we want to look at Sandy only as a managerial candidate. We want Sandy only to think as a managerial candidate.
There's another guy in our organization I don't want to lose, and that's Sarbaugh.
Yeah, Sarby is a special guy. I mean, he's a winner. I mean, number one, he's a developer. He's become a good baseball guy. Eric Wedge had a great influence on him and impact on him coming up, spending time with Eric, and really committed as a mentor to him and helping to develop him. And I've watched Sarby develop. You know, I had him as a player when I was farm director here 20 years ago, and watched him develop first as a coach and then as a manager. And he's certainly ready to be a major league staff person with impact.
He's destined to be a manager someday in the big leagues with his success. All right, Mark, thank you very much.
Yeah,
appreciate it. You got a busy offseason ahead of you. Mark Shapiro, the president of the Cleveland Indians. Chris Antonetti, still to come.